What exactly is the Hylian afterlife? Where do Hylians go when they die? Well, contrary to popular belief, the Hylian afterlife is not your standard heaven and hell system that most of us are familiar with, but rather its own unique system that contains aspects such as spirits, reincarnation, undead creatures, and more. With the exception of a few details scattered across the series, there never really was any clear indication on how the Zelda afterlife system works, until now. After observing many common themes and story elements from across the whole series, the system has finally been decoded and I cannot wait to share it with you all. Without further delay, sit back and let's get right into the video. To start this area off, let's talk about the many spirits that exist within the Zelda series. Spirits, or the ghostly remains of once alive beings, tend to be very important players within the game's main stories, and there is a reason for that. Let's look at Breath of the Wild's 4 main champions for an example: Mipha, Daruk, Revali, and Urbosa. Each of these champions had a very important purpose in life, which was to assist Link and Zelda in defeating Calamity Ganon. Unfortunately for them, their lives were ended at a moment's notice, but later came back in the form of spirits to once again help Link when he reawakened 100 years later. You may be thinking, how exactly were these characters allowed to come back as spirits instead of just staying dead? Well, to answer your question, let's look at another character from Breath of the Wild who turned into one as well, King Rhoam. After falling to Calamity Ganon 100 years prior, the king was able to come back as a spirit to help an amnesiac Link rediscover his memory upon reawakening. As proven by these two instances, it seems to be that these characters came back as spirits because their life still held a greater, unfulfilled destiny that needed to be fulfilled, so they were given an extension on their life to do so. These are the only 5 characters within the game who became spirits after death, which proves that not everyone who dies in the Zelda universe experiences this form of an afterlife. However, spirits do have their own limitations on what they can do and where they can go, as each of the 4 champion spirits are restricted to the confines of their own divine beasts, and the king spirit can only be found on the Great Plateau. Since we now know that people can only become spirits because they have a greater purpose in life that they need to fulfill, what exactly happens when these spirits fulfill that said purpose? Well, simple. They just vanish. As soon as Link defeats Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild, the 5 spirits are no longer needed as their destinies and reasons for existing have already been fulfilled, so they then just disappear. Although I just used Breath of the Wild as an example here, the core mechanics behind Spiritual Afterlife are actually the same across all Zelda games in the series. Let's take Majora's Mask for an example and talk about the Goron spirit, Darmani. Back when he was alive, he was a very important Goron warrior who was tasked with climbing up Snowhead Mountain to confront the beast that was cursing his homeland with an eternal winter. On his quest, he was killed in action, but later returns as a spirit to ensure that his destiny can be one day fulfilled by a successor. In the game, Link meets up with Darmani's spirit and eventually takes him to the Goron graveyard, where Link plays the Song of Healing to put the spirit to sleep. Although Darmani's overall task was not yet finished, he has now found a reliable successor to finish what he started, so he therefore vanishes, but not before putting his soul in the Goron mask to help Link proceed with his mission. Do you see how similar this story was with the one I explained earlier about the champions? In each story, someone with a great, unfulfilled purpose has died, but later came back as a spirit to fulfill this destiny, and only after that said purpose has been fulfilled, they then vanish, which is the same system that is used across all the spirits in the Zelda universe. Now, you may be wondering, why do only the important characters in the series get to become spirits, while the common, everyday Hyruleans do not? Well, let's look at one more thing that all spirits in the series have in common, which is that they are all in some way connected to Link. Ever notice how each of these spirits' purposes are revolved around helping Link fulfill his destiny? This is definitely no coincidence, as all spirits within the Zelda universe are created to serve as guides to the chosen hero. This is also the main reason why we don't encounter evil spirits throughout the series, because it would completely go against the philosophy of spirits that I stated earlier. Although it is impossible for a spirit to become evil in the Zelda universe, it is possible for a Hyrulean's fate to be shifted on the wrong path, and join upon the group of the Undead. The Undead is probably the most common form of an afterlife we see in the series, as a large percentage of Hyruleans are assumed to become one of them after death. The Undead is composed of many different creature types, such as Poes, Redeads, and Stalfos, so let's go over each type and how exactly someone would turn into one. First up are the Poes. According to the Zelda Encyclopedia, Poes are spirits of the dead that have become monsters due to their lingering attachment to the world of the living. Basically, if a Hylian feels deep and intense regret at the time when they die, their inner spirit could become outraged and therefore transform into a Poe. Not to be confused with the spirits that I mentioned earlier, Poes serve no other purpose than to get back at the world of the living, explaining why they are always hostile to people like Link. Oddly enough though, there are a couple pose in this series that are actually helpful to Link rather than hostile, such as the Composer Brothers, who teach Link about the location of the Sun Song, and the Phantom Guide, who helps Link navigate the sandstorming desert in Ocarina of Time. So why exactly are these pose in particular different than the rest that we see? Well, for one, the Composer Brothers didn't transform through normal means, as it is said that Ganondorf was the one responsible for their transformation, which must have been the same for the Phantom Guide as well. And also, both the Composer Brothers and the Phantom Guide were destined with eventually helping Link out on his quest, which in turn made them spirits. This explains why they are able to shed the stereotypical hostile attribute of pose, while still resembling them in looks. Besides those exceptions though, if a person wants to avoid becoming a Po when they die, they must possess some sort of inner zen to keep their spirits at bay, to avoid it from manifesting into a Po. Now, let's move on to a different form of undead afterlife, which are the Stalfos. In order to figure out how they are created, let's break down all the information that the games give us on these creatures. In Ocarina of Time, a Kokiri named Fado tells us that all who become lost in the Lost Woods will become Stalfos. We know that the Lost Woods is a very mysterious and magical place, so when a person gets lost and eventually dies in there, we can assume that the wood's magic reanimates their skeleton into a Stalfos. This does make sense, considering that there are a lot of Stalfos in the forest temple that is besides the woods, but what information is there to explain how the rest of these enemies appear within the series? Well, luckily, more information is explained by Fi from Skyward Sword, who states that Stalfos are just skeletons of soldiers who were reborn from the dead. We can assume that just like the Lost Woods, these skeletons were reanimated by magic, and therefore turning into Stalfos. So, if Stalfos are just magically reanimated skeletons, what are Redeads then? Well, simple, they are just magically reanimated corpses, so they are very similar in that regard. The only difference between someone becoming either a Stalfos or a Redead depends on how well their body was preserved after death. This is why we see Redeads mainly in tomb-like areas where bodies can be easily preserved, while Stalfos are usually found in areas where a person would just drop dead and not have their bodies preserved, like the Lost Woods. Now, when it comes to how these corpses or skeletons are infused with magic to become undead, there seems to be many different methods on doing so. Whether it's a cursed place like the Lost Woods, or an evil being like Ganondorf using his powers, any sort of corpse or skeleton can be reanimated using magic to become a member of the undead. This seems to be the case for most of the other undead enemies as well, such as the Stall Children, Bubbles, and even Stallord, as magic can be used to reanimate corpses of all different shapes and sizes. Because of this, we can divide the group of the undead into two categories, the Poes, and everything else that isn't a Po. I know this kind of seems like a weird way to divide it, but it is the most sensical way, as Poes are completely unique in both design and creation to the rest of the undead. There are still a couple undead enemies in the series that have absolutely no background whatsoever, like the Deadhand from Ocarina of Time. So as of right now, we can assume that they belong with the same group of the undead that contains the Stalfos and the Redeads, until a future Zelda game shines a new light on a completely unique and distinct form of the undead. Now that we know about the spirits, Poes, and all other types of undead out there, is there another form of afterlife that is far bigger and more prominent than all the other forms, such as a Hylian heaven? This is a bold concept, and one that isn't explicitly explained anywhere within the series, but it is something I have looked into a lot. In Ocarina of Time, it is said that the three great goddesses, after creating the world, departed for the heavens. This may seem like a dead giveaway for the confirmation of a heaven, but I have a good feeling that the word heaven in this case is just a simple word replacement for upwards or something above. Even looking ahead to Twilight Princess, it was said to the player that the final shard of the Mirror of Twilight was being held in the heavens, which in this case was just referring to the city in the sky, which was no heaven. Now, what about the other possible signs of a heaven in the Zelda series? Well, in Ocarina of Time, after Link defeats Twinrova, halos appear above both their heads as they start ascending upwards into a bright light. I hear of Zelda fans out there who constantly use this as evidence towards there being a heaven within the Zelda series, but in reality, people took the scene way too seriously, as it was just meant to be a funny, visual representation of the boss's death. So, where exactly does this leave us with figuring out the existence of a heaven in the Zelda universe? Well, with the lack of definitive evidence on the subject, it doesn't lead to any answer in specific. If there was a hidden heaven within the Zelda universe, how would it be explained to the player anyways? It's not like the Hylians and the other characters within the games will be able to explain the system to the player, as they don't have any evidence to know themselves. The fact that this isn't explained within any of the Zelda games doesn't bother me at all, as I like how the mystery of a potential prominent afterlife has remained a secret throughout this 30+ year franchise. Now, before we wrap up the video, there is still one more form of afterlife that we have not yet discussed, which is reincarnation. I saved this one for last because it is the least common form of an afterlife we see in the series, as only Link, Zelda, and Ganon are the only ones we know for certain who experience this. The reason why these 3 characters are reincarnated is because of a curse that the Demon King, Demise from Skyward Sword, bestowed upon the kingdom of Hyrule. His quote reads, "Though this is not the end, my hate never perishes. It is born anew in a cycle with no end. I will rise again. Those like you, those who share the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero, they are eternally bound to this curse. An incarnation of my hatred shall ever follow your kind, dooming them to wander a blood-soaked sea of darkness for all time." This curse casts a Demise's spirit to be reborn time and time again in the form of the evil being Ganon. Luckily, there usually is a new Link and Zelda from just about every era to stop him, but their methods of reincarnating are a lot different from Ganon's. Let's start with Link, whose spirit reincarnates time and time again to serve as the protector of Hyrule. The thing is, not everybody who embodies the spirit of the hero realizes it right away, as in just about every Zelda game out there, Link starts out as just an average, everyday Hylian who over time realizes that they are the successor to the chosen hero. Zelda's reincarnation methods are similar to Link's, but with a few changes. Unlike the spirit of the hero that can be reborn as an everyday Hylian, every Zelda out there seems to be reborn into the bloodline of the royal family. This is why we see Zelda as royalty in just about every Zelda game out there, with the exception being Wind Waker. In that game, we see Zelda in the form of a pirate named Tetra, but that is only because Hyrule is no longer prevalent in that game, so it would make sense that the future incarnations of Zelda wouldn't take the form of Hyrulean royalty. Since we know that Link and Zelda can be reborn time and time again, is it possible for these characters to be born in eras where there is no evil being threatening the world? Well, the answer is yes, but if there's currently no evil threatening the world, many of these reincarnates of Link and Zelda may never find out about their sacred past lives. Only when a reincarnation of Ganon or another evil being is prevalent, then the Link and Zelda from that era soon realize that they are the ones sworn to protect Hyrule. This cycle of reincarnation is easily one of the most interesting things about Zelda lore, that it adds even more depth to how the Hylian Afterlife system works. Since reincarnation is possible for these 3 characters, who knows if we will see it prevalent in characters from future Zelda games as well. On top of that, I really hope that future games in the series really expand upon what we know about the Hylian Afterlife, whether they go more into detail about known forms of Afterlife, add new types of Afterlife, or even go more into detail about a Hylian Heaven. For now though, the Hylian Afterlife system as we know it has been finally decoded and explained, and I really hope that you all enjoyed the video. The topics in this video took a crazy amount of time to research and theorize, so I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe if you haven't already to support the channel. Thank you to this dude from my Discord server who came up with a theory suggestion, as I probably wouldn't have made this video about it otherwise. Also, thank you to my patrons who helped me out here. If you want to help support the channel and have your name featured at the end of all my future videos, please consider supporting, link below in the description. Thank you all once again for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.